Welcome to another wonderful Power BI customer session at the Microsoft Business Application Summit. My name is Lauren Faber, and I am a member of the Power BI Customer Advisory Team. I'm really excited to have Kasper from Arla Foods here with us today. Kasper will be talking about enabling Arla with big data and self-service analytics. And Kasper, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself and your role a little bit more about Arla Foods and tell us about what we'll be talking about today.
Yes, of course, I'll do that. So I'll jump straight into the intro to Arla. So just a little bit about the company. So it's about 10,000 owners, 9,900 owners, meaning that it's a cooperative. So the farmers who supply the milk to Arla that we produce our products from, they're also the owners of Arla. So of course it's important to us that we make the most out of the milk that we get into Arla. And in terms of milk, it's about 13.9 billion kilos of milk that we get in on a yearly basis, and that makes us the fourth largest dairy in the world, with 19,000 colleagues across the globe. And our products are produced across 4 major brands known all over the world, pretty much. The big ones are here, the Arla brand, of course, Castello, mostly known for cheeses, Puck in the Middle East, and Blurpack. In terms of revenues, it's about 10.4 billion euros in revenue. The products that I mentioned before, it's across 3 major categories. So it's milk, yogurts, powders, and cooking. The biggest category that we have. It's across cheeses and of course butter and spreads. So those are the major categories that where we produce products in, and most of the products are known all over the world, pretty much branded differently. Arla has a vision, and the vision is to create the future of dairy, to bring health and inspiration to the world naturally. And you'll also see that in this presentation, this bit about creating the future of dairy is important. Of course, we also have an ambition to grow. We expect all our owners to deliver more milk, and therefore we also need to grow in terms of how many products we produce, as more milk into Arla also results in more products coming out. In terms of myself, I'm a manager in Arla IT. So I'm sitting in the Arla IT department, in the solutions department, where we develop new applications internally in Arla. I've been with Arla for 2 years, and my responsibility is everything that's got to do with data and analytics, and creating one data foundation for Arla. The department I'm responsible for is known as the analytics powerhouse in Arla, and we're about 70 people. And we do everything that's got to do with the development of analytics to support our data agenda. And we've divided it into, if you look at on the slide on the left side, these are the areas that we work with. So it's self-service analytics. This is where Power BI comes in. It's our standard reporting, financial reporting. We're using predominantly SAP BW, and then what we call advanced analytics, which is where we're building more advanced applications. Again, mostly of this is on top of Microsoft Azure and with Power BI as the front-end tool. And at the core of all of this is our data foundation and our vision, which is basically enabling analytics everywhere in Arla. So moving on to the challenge that we've had, and that we are on our way to solving using Azure and Power BI. So it's probably a challenge that many other companies have. We want to enable Arla with the big data and self-service analytics, and we also want to scale this. So we introduced Power BI across the organization, which really put a big tick in the enabling self-service, but at the same time we then introduced a big challenge in terms of scaling this at an enterprise level. A lot of our applications were built in silos. We have approximately 300 Power BI developers in the organization, And a lot of the reporting that was built using Power BI, it was not built entirely on, as I said before, one data foundation, but a very siloed approach. So this is one of the main challenges that we needed to overcome. The other challenge is that we have a lot of data in our SAP BW, so in our business warehouse, a lot of the data that's coming from our ERP system, but with scale comes also a need to bring in other types of data from our dairies or external data, and that's also not something that we could solve with the platform that we had when we came into this challenge. Another thing is of course the complexity of these applications. They very, very quickly explode as we are letting more developers loose on the data. So there's a challenge here for us in terms of maintaining it and supporting it from an IT point of view. From the analytics powerhouse point of view, it meant that we moved away from our conventional way of looking at data, so basically on-premise data storage. We only had SAP BW, and as I mentioned before, that wasn't enough for what we wanted to do. So we looked at introducing Microsoft Azure and create this data foundation, which is now very, very important for our agenda. So then the move we're seeing here is away from conventional on-premise data storage onto more open cloud-based platforms. The challenge then again becomes that we need different types of skills and we need new processes in the organization to manage all of this.
Yeah, and you mentioned the data foundation. I know that's a huge part of your solution. Could you expand a little bit more on that?
I can. So if we take it from a super high level, this is what it looks like. It looks very simple. We're ingesting data in the bottom from across the organization and also external. So all data that's coming in is basically going through the data foundation. That means that we only load data once into the foundation, and it also means that anything that we build on top of it, we don't put additional load on the source systems. And on top of the data foundation is then where we build our reporting, both in our conventional Excel-based reporting, but of course also Power BI. It's also where we build our models for what we call exploratory data science, and also where we're consuming data with our applications that we are then developing internally. So if I then dive a little bit deeper into it, and if I do that with an example that illustrates some of the challenges that I mentioned before. So we actually have a real example. So it's been anonymized here, but we did actually have we wanted to develop an application, and this was before we had the data foundation. We started out with a source system, and we wanted to develop an application where we can predict the intake of milk into Arla. That's super important for Arla to know how much milk is coming in, so we can plan production better, because it varies. The cows don't always produce the same amount of milk. Very simple, high-level architectural diagram with one source system and one application consuming data from this source system. Then another part of the organization can see the benefit of the output that the application is generating, and they also would like to access the data in the source system. So another application pops up, and all of a sudden we have two sources for the new application. Still relatively simple, but then what happens is a third area of the business comes up, and they want to consume data from all of them, and so on and so forth. And this is very quickly becomes very, very unmanageable because of the complexity. We don't know where the source of truth is, and it's got a massive impact on our source system. And of course, it's literally impossible to monitor and support this entire solution here in this system. And this is just one of a few examples that we had, and which led us to take another approach, which is basically our data foundation. So if we then look at what it should look like and what it looks like today, is again referring back to the slide that we saw before on the data foundation, where we take the same applications that still exist in Arla, but most of them have now been refactored into this type of setup, where we have one source, same source as before. We're ingesting data into the data foundation. There are, of course, more than just one source to power all of these applications, but just for simplicity here, one source into the data foundation we load once, and every application can consume the same data, but through the data foundation. And what we're also doing is ingesting the output from each application back into the data foundation so they can be shared across the other applications. So of course, this is a simplified view of the world, but that's the idea behind our data foundation. So we don't get these dependencies between the applications. We have the single truth, and we're only extracting data once to minimize the load on the source system. And of course, in Analytics Powers, we're happy because we're the ones who have to maintain all of this and support it. So if we then dive even deeper into the data foundation and we take a look at what's there. So we still have our SAP BW on HANA, which is still a key part of our entire BI stack. It's where we have all our financial data from our ERP system. But what we have in addition is a data lake, Microsoft Azure, where we bring data in and we move it through our different layers in the data lake, all the way from raw. We cleanse it, curate it, and we make it ready for consumption, for example, in Power BI. So what we end up with having is a box that looks something like this, with again SAP BW combined with Microsoft Azure, which does pose a bit of a challenge for us in some ways, but the opportunities by far outweigh the challenges that we have with having this set up. And then zooming in a little bit more on the data foundation and looking at how does it actually work? How does the data flow in the data foundation? And this is what it looks like. So before the data foundation, we basically only had the top layer, our SAP applications. We were using data services to ingest data into SAP BW. And then we were using Power BI as our front-end tool. Well, eventually we were using it to begin with. We were only using Excel. The challenge that we had then was that in order to actually see any data in Power BI, our developers not sitting in IT, they were extracting data into Excel and then from Excel loading that into Power BI, which again makes it very unmanageable for us in IT with that approach. So that's also something that we are going to solve using this setup here with the data foundation. What we've also expanded is where we're getting data from. So as you can see, it's not just SAP, internal SAP applications. We're also expanding it to other types of applications. We have a lot of warehousing systems, for example. We have a lot of systems that's being used in logistics that are not based on SAP. And all of that data we can now also bring in. We're bringing that in using Azure Data Factory into a data lake. And then we can transform that data and use it within the data foundation for final consumption. Most of the cases, it's Power BI. Production data we can also take in from most of our production sites now, and even from the farm. If there are sensors on the farm that we'd like to utilize, it's just becoming increasingly important with our carbon neutral agenda. That's also perfectly possible with this setup. We haven't moved in that direction yet, but everything is prepared for it. And what we're doing is using Databricks for the transformation of the data. If we're doing some of these more advanced applications, we're using Python or R for the models, but it's always Power BI. That's the front-end tool. So that's how the setup looks, and that's basically how we're solving our problems from a technical point of view. So everything that we build now, we're building using this setup here, and we're also refactoring some of our old solutions into this stack that you're seeing on the screen now.
Yeah, the current challenge that you had is pretty common for a lot of companies who have a lot of different data sources and inputs of data, and the solution that you've been able to come up with this data foundation is super smart and innovative, and it makes a ton of sense. Do you happen to have a demo today or some examples of some of the reports that you've been able to build?
Yes, I do. I have some examples that I can show you. So just to give you just a little bit of insight into what we're using this data foundation for, without going into details on some of them, but it's not just simple reporting. We are actually using it, as I said before, to get back in control of some of the critical reporting that's been developed by some of our users and Power BI developers outside of IT. We're using it to provide global logistics transparency, and this is where we're combining multiple warehousing systems, multiple logistics systems, data from all of those. We're combining that, and again, we're using Power BI to visualize all of this data. The tool that you saw before about predicting global milk intake, we're expanding that using this platform, and the entire platform is a major contributor to reducing our carbon emissions. So we have an ambition of reducing it by 30% by 2030 and being completely neutral or carbon neutral by 2050. And a lot of that is done using analytics, and this is again where we're using the platform. Then the last point here is very relevant now. What we are also able to do is very, very quickly launch new applications that we can support and we can maintain from an IT point of view. So I'd like to show you just very briefly, just show you what we've done. This is something where we were impacted quite severely by COVID-19. It impacted on demand, and if there's an impact on demand, it means that our long-term planning of what we're producing at the dairies, it's no longer correct. We also had an impact on capacity, so that meant that both supply and demand were out of sync. And we needed something very, very quickly, very, very short term, to be able to replan on the right sites and on the right production lines. So we brought in data from SAP BW, amongst other places, but also manual input from some of the sites. We used the data foundation for that, and then we used Power BI to create a visual interface that people could use both on site, but also from a planning point of view. So the screenshot you're seeing, it's been heavily anonymized, so it's a little bit difficult to see what's there. But this was something we were able to do in a matter of days. And then if we then look at some of the bigger solutions that we're building, so if I go back to this milk intake solution that we talked about before, it's a very good example of how we're using the data foundation to create new applications. So as quickly mentioned before, it is really, really important for us to know how much milk is coming in. So we've always done this, tried to estimate and forecast it. The difference is that before it was done very much on experience. So it was a group of people who had a lot of experience with what was happening in the market. They had a lot of experience with what's happening with the productivity of the cows during the different seasons, etc. And they came up with an estimate. What we are moving towards now, and what you also saw in the very beginning of the presentation, there's a definite move towards being more data-driven within Arla. So rather than only relying on experience, we are now also basing our forecast on a machine learning model. So we're predicting the milk that's coming in based on a number of different external factors. And this is where we're actually using all of the components in our data foundation. So we're bringing in data, both internal and external to Arla. We're using our data lake to store the training data for the model. We're using Power BI for the visualization. And what's important for us here is that it's not the actual interface is not actually developed by IT. It's someone in the department, in the milk planning department, who's developed it, so that he's consuming the same data that we're building or that we're using to train our models on. That's the same data that he's building the interface on. From our point of view, we are using a Shiny, which is the front-end application to R. It's the same data, but we have different needs in IT than they have outside of IT with this type of data. But this setup allows us to use multiple tools and then to interact with the data using different types of tools. So what it looks like is fairly simple. Just before we go into that, just to go back to what we said before, this is actually something where we changed the business, we changed the technologies, we changed the way that we're using our technologies. So we've had to change the skills that we have, and finally, and probably most importantly, we've actually changed the forecast processes from being experience-driven to being very much data-driven. And what it looks like is something like this. So this is the front page, very, very simple. You have an overview, and it's possible to go in and look at the total intake, the forecasts, and a number of different KPIs. So some of these are when we first started with this in IT, it was basically the forecast that was important. So the rest is something that people outside of IT and the core team have actually done only using Power BI and simply with the knowledge that they have about the needs in the business. And again, these slides the numbers have been taken out, so there's more information on them, but it is possible then to dive into the data, do drill downs on the countries. This is showing actual intake, for example. What's also important for Arla is to know the percentage of fat and protein in the milk. This will give that overview. So this is actual data that we're showing here. If we move on, it's possible to compare countries, but most importantly with this solution, we can then see that here's we are seeing both the results from the machine learning model, the forecasted result, and the actuals, which is also what we're illustrating here, which is important for the business and which is what they use when they're planning production. That was the example that I just wanted to share with you here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kasper. It's cool to see how your solution really has made it so much easier to make these reports and allow Arla Foods to be focused on that data-driven culture. So I see here you have some key drivers for adoption. Could you go into a little bit about those and what has been able to help you be successful?
I can, yeah. So the top one here is a realization that it's for us, at least, it's been equally important to have a data foundation as it has been having Power BI in resolving some of these challenges. So self-service wasn't just resolved by introducing Power BI. It can only really be resolved once we also are in control of the data foundation, which is where Azure then comes in. So that's been hugely important for us. It's also been very important to have a very strong technology team who can come up with both thinking in the architectural ways, putting together a good architecture. So we have a very strong architectural team as well as a very strong development team that we actually hired in specifically for this solution here. Then change management is of course always important, but when we're doing something this big, we're basically changing the way that we work with data across all of Arla, then it becomes super important to have a dedicated change management function. This is also what we are ramping up now, both in terms of making sure that people use the tools correctly, but also that they know what the opportunities are with the data foundation with Power BI. Then it's important to show business value right from the beginning. So we didn't just build a data foundation just to build it. Every time we built something in the data foundation, we also built an application on top of it so that we could show value. Governance is very important. It's important to have a balance between agility and control. From an IT point of view, it's of course very easy if we can control everything, but the value isn't as great, of course. So it's finding this balance that's important. And then, of course, an executive team that trusts that we can change and we can deliver relatively complex technology projects has also been very, very important for us. I think that's what I wanted to share with you here. So thanks, Lauren.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kasper. I really appreciate your time and I know the work that you put into this presentation. So thank you so much for your participation and for being here.
Thank you.